we believe if you're going to do it, the audit should be worth it. The problem is, audits are hard. Yet we've issued over 20,000 reports to 2,000 clients worldwide.
Just don't wait to prepare. The time to start preparing for this is now. And it's going to make everything 10 times, 100 times easier if you start that process now.
Cybersecurity and compliance will no longer be a mystery.
Well, welcome everybody to our cybersecurity mission. My name is Allie Krings. I'm your host. When Joseph Kirkpatrick started brainstorming what this podcast was going to be about, one of his biggest passions was that it is going to not just elevate and empower the standards of cybersecurity and compliance, but to educate those around us in the cybersecurity space how we can do better, how we can be better, and how we can navigate through challenges. So part of that, and I do thank you guys so much, we have Alan Wallman, Duncan Woosley, and Eric Perry joining the call. They're going to be talking about incident response on this call, and it was a very recent occurrence that went down, so we're going to dive right in. So first of all, I want to go ahead and introduce all of my guests. We have Alan Wallman joining us. He is a privacy auditor with Kirkpatrick Price. Alan, thank you so much for being here. Just give us a quick synopsis. How long have you been working in the cybersecurity space?
Yeah, I've been doing privacy kind of in this space and others for about 15 years now, and there's always something new. So it's an exciting place to be.
Especially the way that technology evolves, I'm sure it's one of those roles that you can't really ever just get complacent.
No, not at all. And great job security as well. Love it.
Awesome. And then we do have Duncan Woosley who's joining us. Duncan, you're a penetration tester with Kirkpatrick Price. Tell us, how did you get involved in that role, and what is it that drew you to that position?
Sure thing. So yeah, definitely what drew me to penetration testing is just the different things that go on every day. Everything's unique. It's something odd, something new to learn. You never stop learning. So that was what really drew me to it. And I got started actually here with Kirkpatrick Price, and kind of brought up through just a training process here, and been here for 5 years.
Awesome. And then, of course, our last guest joining us, we have Eric Perry. He is our team lead of IT. Eric, thanks so much for being here. I know you're in cybersecurity now with IT, but that hasn't always been the case, right?
Yeah, that's right. I started out my career in television of all things. Always had the IT bug. I have systems built at home, always had this as a hobby in my life. And about, 4 years ago or so, I decided to make the switch, and it was just a natural fit for me. So dipping my toes in the cybersecurity, definitely incident response is part of my duties here at KP. So definitely learning a lot from the group here, and was happy to help out in this incident that we helped out with.
And we are going to dive into that incident, but we do have a privacy auditor on the call, the team lead of IT, and a pen tester. So, Alan, I'm going to ask you, how common is it in an occurrence of incident response to see these three people kind of team up?
That's an interesting question. I think it's common in successful incident responses when you get people from different backgrounds, different teams, people that can add different elements of what needs to be in the incident response. But how common universally, maybe less than it should. You maybe have one or two people, maybe just the people that were involved, and they're not always the right people to really deal with the full scope of incidents. So hopefully it gets more common, because I think the way we're going to talk about this, we can show why it was beneficial.
Yeah, awesome. Well, let's go ahead and dive right into the story. The story kind of starts in the beginning with Duncan Woosley. So Duncan, will you just walk us through what happened?
Yeah, sure thing. So we had a situation where actually one of our clients reached out to us, or through our client, and asked for some help with the incident that they had. And what was going down was they had some employee that was taking data that they should not have had, and this could have had some potential sensitive data in it. So think PII and potential health data, and it wasn't clear. There's a lot up in the air on what's going on here. And so they brought in a pen tester, since I have a background in seeing the attacks, knowing what these look like, and we didn't know much more than what we had there. And so I was able to go down and help them that day, and get started on just figuring out what is even going on, get some information, working with our client to help them as well, and start the process of just figuring out and cutting through the noise and figuring out a little bit of what's going on and where to go next from there.
Maybe a silly question here, but Duncan, explain to me, why does it even matter if somebody took this data?
Yeah, and that's where we pull Alan in a lot more, especially from the protected data side of things. It just depends on, do you have legal ramifications or anything that would require you to disclose that this data was disclosed unauthorized? And then even was it unauthorized? There's a lot that we had to investigate once we first got there that we didn't know going into it.
So after you're kind of boots on the ground, you're the first on the scene. I know at some point you involve Eric. Tell us why you involved Eric and how that conversation started.
Sure. So what happened is we really cut through the noise and started figuring out what's going on. We figured out that there was a high up in the organization that was potentially and allegedly on their way out, and they were
Mhm.
trying to take some data on their way out. They tried first with a USB drive, and that didn't work out, so they tried another method, and that looked like it did work. And at that point, IT was notified. They saw some big file transfers happening, and this was happening through the cloud. Um, and so we started looking into that, started getting into logs, and that's where it really started to get out of my element a little bit. So once we started saying, okay, we know what we need to get, we know what we need to prove, we're going to try to build a timeline, we're going to try to figure out what's happening, and really find out what was taken and what was in that data. But now we need to start pulling logs from Azure, we need to pull logs from different clouds. And so that's where Eric really had the expertise, and so we pulled Eric in to help from there.
So, Duncan, when you're there and you're saying first they tried the thumb drive, how did you even know that they tried that and why wouldn't that have worked?
So they were working with other individuals in the organization that later ended up reporting the incident, and they were trying to get some help from there. There were controls in place to prevent this very thing from happening with a thumb drive, but that wasn't applied across the board, and so that was applied in one sector and that one control to prevent the thumb drive, but not in cloud sharing, and that ended up being what was used to try to export this data.
Okay, so now you're starting to go through all of these logs, and that's when you're like, okay, I really need some help. There's really nobody better than our team lead of IT here at Kirkpatrick Price, Eric Perry. This is where you should say, like, exactly,
Yep.
definitely.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right.
So, Eric, now that you're part of the story, walk us through those first conversations with Duncan and how do you jump into action?
Yeah, so just trying to get a lay of the land, understanding the whole situation, at least from what he knows at that point in time. So we had a call just to discuss, okay, what are all the factors involved? What's the situation? What information does he know already? And then some of it could be a little inaccurate or not based on the information that they gathered already, because ultimately when we got in there, we found that we were missing information. So really just understanding the situation. Then, after, talking with Duncan, I was able to meet with them, with our client, and work with them to understand further what they knew. They had more information about interviews with the individuals. They had a little bit more background on, what the CEO wanted, what what happened with between IT and this individual. So it's, you're just gathering information at that point and getting an understanding of what you're looking for, or what you might not see in the logs that we currently had. So
Mhm.
we built up that, the information bank essentially for that day. And to be honest, we didn't really getting into the logs or really knowing what we understood until the second day that
Mm.
we were into it. So it was a lot of information gathering and just kind of understanding what we were looking at, to be honest.
When you start going into that timeline, though, like you're on your first day, you're just collecting all of this information. How time sensitive is this? I mean, does everybody in the organization kind of need to drop what they're doing to make sure they can chat with you and explain? Or is this something where, the CEO is busy until 4 p.m. today? Can you wait until 4 p.m.?
Yeah, I would say in the terms of incident response, we were in the like kind of the isolation stage already, which means the situation was contained. Now we're just trying to
Mhm.
understand what happened.
Okay.
So their IT department took care of that fairly quickly. I mean, I had some recommendations on how quickly they were able to do that, and there were some business processes that probably got in the way of that. So we didn't have a full understanding of like what goes into that or what power IT had to be able to do that or take care of the isolation earlier.
Mhm.
But I would say that they handled it. They had it isolated. We just came in and got a full picture and created a timeline for them. So that's really what helped our client follow through with their duties, was getting a really good understanding based on what the logs told us, which is the immutable proof, right?
Hmm. How important is that timeline, and what should they then? I mean, is this just like a nice document to have, or how do they take action from the timeline?
Yeah, so if you're looking at incident response, and I don't have the steps in front of me, unfortunately, but what essentially you're looking at, the first, like, there's prepare, there's detect, and then there's and Duncan, you might be able to help me with this, but there's the what is it, detect and isolate, and man, I can't remember the other steps, but the isolation step is the most time and sensitive
Okay.
one. You want that to be taken care of because that prevents any further blast radius, let's say, or any
Hmm.
other documents releasing in this scenario. So you want that contained. You want that to be the time sensitive part. Once you have it isolated, there's no more data going out. There's no more exfil of data. So you want to protect. I'm not protect. I'm sorry. You want to then find out. Okay, what did get out? You want to
Hmm.
find out how it got out. You want to find out who accessed it. You want to know when it happened. And in all those
Hmm.
scenarios, you want to create a timeline that really details the events. In this
Yeah.
scenario, we also included communication as an aspect of that in the events. That way, we understood, okay, how did people react? How did the IT team report this? How did they react to it? How quickly did they react to it? What was involved in that reaction in terms of, like, did they need to go through the CEO, or do they need to go to a
Hmm.
chief CTO, or do they need to go to security? All those factors were involved in identifying, um, what their timeline looked like and what may have slowed them down in that process. The other
Hmm.
part of it was how they detected it. In this case, Duncan mentioned that it was reported, right? So instead of them IT being able to detect that through like logging or something like that, it was actually reported. So then the idea is, okay, in this scenario, what else needs to be done from a lessons learned standpoint, which is the last step in this process of understanding, what do they need to do to make sure that
Hmm.
they can detect this from a technical standpoint, not just someone catching it, while it's happening. So yeah, I would say that the timeline part, you want to take your time with that and understand what happened and
Yeah.
learn from that. So you want to take your time and analyze that. Whereas the isolation step needs to be quick, detection hopefully super quick, depending on the situation, though, that isn't always the case.
So, and when it comes to reporting, I'm asking both in this scenario and what should someone do. I- you know, God forbid something is happening like this in your organization, but is the person reporting supposed to take this to HR? Are they going straight to IT? Are they just letting their manager know? Who are they reporting to?
I would say it depends on the organization.
Hmm.
If it were like a help desk person, for instance, if it were my help desk person, I would expect them to report to me, and then I would report it to our CTO or our security team,
Hmm.
and then go beyond that, depending on the impact, right?
Sure.
A lot of times, any incidents, will go straight to the top, based on some of it's like you want to empower your IT team to isolate it right away, right?
Hmm.
In this
Hmm.
scenario, yeah, that's a clear indication that data was exfiltrated, and it's
Yeah.
it's against company policy to go outside of your company data store, right? So in this case, you want your IT team to feel empowered to block that and then report it. Whereas, in some business processes, it's like always the top making that decision before that can happen. So it just depends on your business, really.
Yeah. And Alan, thank you so much for joining us. Alan Wellman, our privacy auditor here at Kirkpatrick Price, is on the call as well. Alan, how did you get roped into this mess, and why were you involved?
Sure. Well, anytime you've got an incident that involves data and potentially personal data, maybe health data, maybe just any other data that could identify someone, there may be more to do after you've mitigated the incident, after you've figured out what happened, after you've stopped it. There may be some people you need to tell about this. You may have
Mhm.
obligations, maybe to tell a regulator, maybe to tell the individuals involved in the incident. And so you've got to ask a bunch of questions and fit this puzzle together to decide, hey, is there more for us to do? Do we need to notify different groups about what happened maybe what to do next, that kind of thing. So that's really where I came in as the organization was trying to feel their way into what are the right questions to ask to figure this out.
Who would potentially be somebody that you would notify?
So potentially, based on the data involved, based on the people connected to the data involved, you might need to notify a regulatory agency. You might need to notify the actual individuals connected to that data and say, hey, something recently happened with your data. Here's what happened. And it really depends on, how much data, what kind of data, what was the situation? Has it been contained or is it still kind of floating out there? So a lot of that research that Eric and Duncan are doing, you got to have those answers to really figure out what are our notification obligations here.
So in this scenario, what did you guys decide?
So in this one, it's with the client. We said you've really got to ask a few key questions. You've really got to determine, how much and what kind of data, and they were able to figure that out. Then I said you've really got to figure out the motives as well of the person, because a lot of breach notification standards or regs, however you want to refer to them, that's an important piece. Is this a malicious act or is this a thoughtless act? Because that can kind of indicate maybe the risk of additional harm to the people who are connected to the data.
Could you explain to us the difference between the two?
Absolutely. So malicious act, I go into the company, there's all this data in here. I say, I'm going to take this. Maybe I can go sell this. Maybe I'm going to impersonate these people, do some identity theft. I'm going to commit some crimes with this data. I'm going to, and that's really going to harm these people involved. Thoughtless is, hey, I want to take some data, and maybe it's not even this personal data. I want to take some business confidential things, maybe because it's helpful for me. Maybe I'm trying to get another job someday. And now I've taken some additional data as well, because I'm just grabbing folders. I'm throwing it on the thumb drive, or I'm just sending it, however, to get it to my own personal drive here. There's a bit of a difference, right? I'm not taking this. Maybe I took it accidentally, or I don't really intend to commit illegal acts with the data. Still wrong, still not something you're supposed to be doing, but there is a notable difference there with that. And that can inform potentially your decision on if you need to notify a regulator, on if you need to notify the individuals, because the risk of harm to those people is something that you've got to honestly and carefully figure out when you're making that decision.
So when, as an organization, you get together and maybe you do decide that it was a thoughtless act, okay, let's just go with that for the sake of the argument today. What are the repercussions? I mean, is this just like a slap on the wrist situation, or how does an organization move forward when somebody, not nefariously, but takes data like that?
Well, first and foremost, I think you've got to look to your own policies to inform what your next steps should be. Ideally, you've already made the decision, hey, should anything like this happen, this is how we respond. It's a terrible time to figure out how do we respond when it's time to respond. You want to have already figured that out beforehand. So you're going to look at your policies. What does that mean as far as employee coaching, as far as employee discipline? Maybe, unfortunately, terminating employment if that's what's required. Maybe even criminal charges if it is more of a nefarious act, if it's that kind of situation. All those things are potentially on the table depending on the particulars. So ideally, you've got some policies and processes in place to say, hey, when this happens, this is what we do. When that happens, this is the way we respond. That is the best way to move forward. And of course, depending on the severity maybe of your response, you're wanting to partner with legal, you're wanting to partner with your people team, you're wanting to partner with those other experts in your org that can also help in this aspect of the incident response. So again, that circle of people that we're involving should be growing the more that we learn and the more steps that we decide we need to take.
Alec, can I step in?
Go ahead, dive in.
I mean, that's part of that incident response cycle, right? It's about preparing. So he's talking about the preparation stage of make sure you have all the documents in hand, your policies are in place, what you do in these situations, who you involve in these situations. So he's exactly describing what you do to prepare for these incidents. That way you're ready for them when it comes around. And by the way, I just want to also note that Alan is great with clients. I was on the phone with him on that, and he pretty much answered every question before they were even asked, which was great, and even included some things that were just out of the immediate scope that weren't even considered at the time. So It's great to have someone who's got a lot of expertise in this field working with our clients here.
It's really awesome to see this group coming together, right? Eric Perry, again, he's our team lead of IT here at Kirkpatrick Price. Alan Wellman, he's our privacy auditor. And then, of course, we have Duncan Woosley, who's a pen tester. So I love that, we'll say this again and again on the podcast, but it is our cybersecurity mission. There's not a single person that this kind of silos to make it their problem. At Kirkpatrick Price, it's our job to make sure that it's fixed, to make sure that people are educated. And that doesn't just mean those who are dealing with the true cybersecurity space. That means every single employee. So I'm so glad that you guys are all on this call kind of breaking down your specific roles. And Alan, you did touch on that policy and procedure. So maybe we can start there. And Eric, I know you're talking a little bit about that preparedness plan here. How should a company start a preparedness plan?
Yeah, so I would say just start with your incident response, document essentially, and then you start looking at, okay, what do we need to prepare for various incidents? You always want to think about what incidents you may approach, whether it's like insider risk, that could be an employee in this case, taking data. It could be them stealing or selling proprietary information. It could be them, maliciously hacking your own infrastructure. It could be as simple as that. Or I should say as complicated as that.
As simple as that.
Yeah.
Just hacking your own infrastructure.
It's easier to say that's a bad thing, But then, you want to work through those situations, understand, what your risks are, and kind of almost tabletop things, and think about what resources do we need to have available so that we can easily, reference the guy or the document to go find that resource when the incident's happening. Because it's, there's a lot of emotions involved with incident response. You just, everyone doesn't know which direction to go. You forget the basics. And that document is there to help you understand, okay, I need to go reach out to legal in this situation, or I need to go direct to IT or HR in this situation. And then the IT, HR, based on what they have in front of them, needs to go to the CEO or something like that. Understanding who to contact, having that contact information available is important as well. So just working through the situations and just brainstorming what is your risk, what is your the avenues in which you may go down over the years. And that's just part of the preparation stage. And to be honest, it's a cycle. So it's not just you do it all at once and you're done with it. It's you do it every year, maybe twice a year. Some people do it quarterly. It just depends on your risk factor. And you're building out your response to that. And then when you actually do have incidents, it's a cycle of learning from those mistakes out of the normal cycle, and then correcting for that or preparing for the next one.
So part of that, preparedness is having the policies in place. And Eric, one of the things that you shared was that IT did have policies in place, but they weren't necessarily super clear with, who was allowed, who wasn't. Can you walk us through that a little bit and then maybe make a recommendation as well?
Yeah, I don't have a full knowledge of that. I will say that it was secondhand knowledge. But from what I understand is that it's, it's best that everyone reviews the policies yearly so that they understand what they're responsible for, what is allowed and not allowed. Because, you may be working for 5 years, Duncan, for instance. Let's just say he hasn't reviewed the handbook in 5 years. It's likely been updated since then, or he needs to know how much vacation time is the most important thing to him, probably, but he needs also know what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, right? So, I think it's important that you review that information yearly. That way, when something comes up, you're immediately aware, that's not right, or no, that's not allowed. We can't do that. Sorry. They know the answers when they are asked of it. Because a lot of times, when it's an IT issue, that the people are going to come to you, and you need to be pretty knowledgeable of those documents so that way you can answer correctly.
Absolutely. And Duncan, when is the last time you reviewed the employee handbook? I'm not really going to ask you that because I'm sure it was just yesterday.
It was really recent. I read the whole thing recently. Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Since Eric's on the call. Yeah.
But tell us, Duncan, you kind of started, you were the first boots on the ground in this situation. So you're kind of walking through, you bring Eric involved. I know that you'd been talking to Alan since the beginning. Walk this, tie it in a bow for us. How does this end, and what was your continued role?
Right. Yeah. I mean, from the very get-go, we're first trying to say, is everything contained as it should be? And fortunately, did a lot of that work already. But we're really just trying to help them through that whole process, right? To actually figure out the next steps to collect that data and to know what we need to respond to it. But the takeaways here was the biggest thing could have been preparation would have helped this by a
Mhm.
long shot. If they had prepared beforehand, they would have known how to respond to this much faster. They would have been able to train their employees better to not do this sort of action, and then also the policies that they had in place could have been fleshed out more as well. And so if they had someone review those policies and say, hey, you could have added this to it and this to it and this to it, and then loop that back into the preparation for the next time, that would have helped them save a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of stress from this whole incident.
I think that stress is probably a big one. And I'm really glad that, again, this wasn't Kirkpatrick Price's client. This is our client's client working through a little bit of a mess. So I'm really grateful that our team was able to show up, kind of give them a little bit of a reprieve and a breakdown. Alan, I want to get back to you. When you're going through this process, what are some of the recommendations or lessons learned that you want to bring back to us?
Yeah, just hearing, Duncan mentioned the stress kind of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be stressed a little bit. It's either during the incident or it's going to be as you're spending a little time preparing for the incident. And that's okay. And I would tell groups, do not resent the time it takes to do this right. Like, be ready to work on it ahead of time, because then you get to experience it a little more smoothly when you really need it. And that I can't underscore that enough, because in the moment, it's hard to know what choices to make, and you probably will not make all the right choices if you're trying to make them for the first time right then.
So with that, in your incident response plan, Alan, I mean, how do we come up with all of these scenarios? Is there a guidebook laying around or like a checklist to make sure we talk about, X, Y, and Z, what happens when an employee tries to take our own data?
Yeah, I don't know if you might go that specific to an employee taking it, but you should have some kind of internal checklist or even
Mhm.
decision tree that, ask one of those key questions. Is this malicious or is this thoughtless? And
Mhm.
depending on what you feel and how confident you are in that answer, your response should start to diverge and be a little different. And you ask some other questions. How many people? How much
Mhm.
data are we talking about? Data belonging to 10 people or 10,000 people? And depending what that is, it starts to diverge just a little bit, but those are key differences. Yeah, you should already have some of that built out in your plan so that okay, these are the key questions and these inform those key parts of our response. Absolutely.
With that incident response plan, who does need to be involved in those conversations?
Oh man, again, I'll go back to our big circle of people that
Mhm.
those that we would want to involve in the actual response. They need some input in the plan. Obviously, your teams with IT, your technology teams, people in charge of your tech stack, they're going to have a heavy bit of how that's going to look because they can speak to the infrastructure. But you need privacy involved, and you need legal, and you do need the people teams involved because often incidents
Mhm.
involve people. And
Yeah.
what's the response on that side? You need a lot more than just the director of IT just kind of writing this freehand. You want input from all of the people that are going to be actually involved when the time comes. So yeah, broaden that circle and get those groups involved actually in creating the plan again, because make the decisions now and then it's already ready when the time comes.
You know,
And
I,
I'll add to that too. You want to have management all the way up to the CEO supporting that incident response, because when you need to take action, they need to be behind you on those actions. So it's really important that you have all the way up to the top level on those.
and walk me through, guys. We're kind of at the tail end of this here. How does the story end?
We as as a support to our client, we created a timeline that was very
Mhm.
detailed for them to work with. So I think at that point, I actually stepped out, and I think Alan was involved maybe once or twice more on a couple calls in addition to that after that. So he might be able to touch on more on this. But they took that essentially to the CEO, and they worked through the whole issue, and that timeline really helped describe, okay, this is the entire
Mhm.
incident, and this is what happened. And that empowered the CEO to make decisions that were based on the immutable facts.
Mhm.
And then so I think Alan, I'm maybe speaking early or not, but I think he had a couple calls with them too, just to answer questions. Is that correct?
At the end, we did just kind of talk again about, if we determine this, what's the right kind of notification response? If we determine that, because again, there's still a little bit of what were the motives? What's the extent? Is it truly mitigated? Those things that they're wrapping up. So we did just want to kind of say, hey, if door number 1, this is probably the best course of action. If number 2, this is what you're looking at. If door number 3, kind of take this response. But yeah, you're right about that, Eric.
It's just been a fascinating experience. And I do want to say thank you guys for taking the time to break it all down. Is there anything else that you guys want to chime in really quick before we wrap this one up?
I guess just don't wait to prepare. The
Yeah.
time to start preparing for this is now. And it's going to make everything 10 times, 100 times easier if you start that process now. And then if you get in the incident and you can do some lessons learned, or even if you simulate an incident and use some lessons learned, you improve that process and you can start the process now of making a better process and improving that going forward.
Well, I want to say thank you so much, Duncan Woosley, Eric Perry, Alan Wellman. Thank you for taking the time to join us on our podcast. Thank you for really breaking this down because, again, it's our cybersecurity mission. So we want to empower, we want to educate, we want to elevate the standards of cybersecurity and compliance. And for those of you who have been listening today, if you do have any additional questions, whether it's, on a topic like this or you want to dive in deeper somewhere else, I want to invite you to go to kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast. On that page, of course, you can check out all of our episodes, but you're also going to be able to ask your own questions, make a comment, make a recommendation even. And then I do want to invite you to join us on LinkedIn. That's where you can really see our active community there. So it's our cybersecurity mission. My friends, I want to say thank you again, and we'll catch you again next time. Thank you.
When you work with a Kirkpatrick Price cybersecurity auditor, you work with someone who's been in your shoes. Let's see what the next expert is ready to share to support you in your cybersecurity mission.
Hello everyone, my name is Jacory St. Fort. I'm an information security auditor with Kirkpatrick Price. My favorite topics are network monitoring and vulnerability management. I enjoy these two topics because they're fundamental to protecting your network. My recommendation in order to further understand these topics is to leverage vendor documentations. You could look at Palo Alto documentations, Cisco documentations, CrowdStrike, in order to get a better understanding of such topics. And then also there's plenty of free resources on YouTube that you could leverage to get a better technical understanding of those topics.
Today's episode highlights the need for incident response to achieve our challenging compliance goals. You have to practice to be ready to respond to the next attack. Are you ready to join a community of 10,000 people who are working together to elevate the standards for cybersecurity and compliance? It's free to sign up at kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast or check the show notes and achieve greater levels of assurance today. Thanks for joining us on our cybersecurity mission.